Welcome to TK Q&A, questions and answers about transitional kindergarten. My name is Amy Moser. I'm the UPK coordinator for the Kern County Superintendent of Schools. Today on the podcast, I have Dr. Julie Nicholson. Dr. Julie Nicholson, welcome to TK Q&A. Can you say hello and tell us a little bit about your background?
Hello, it's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast. So I am thrilled. My background, I started as an early childhood educator. I was a preschool teacher and then a kindergarten teacher, and I've had tremendous interest for many years at the bridge between early learning and public education. I've been a teacher, I've been a professor, I'm a nonprofit leader, but always in the service of early childhood and best practices to support young children to thrive and the adults who serve them and work with them.
Yes. So, Julie, our format on the podcast is we pose a question and then we bring on a guest to answer that question. And our questions are usually based around concepts and things that we get asked about as a UPK team here. So, our question for you today is, why is play so important in transitional kindergarten?
That is such an important question.
It is.
I love that you are asking that question.
It's a big question.
It's a really big question, but it's something that we can really dig our teeth into. We can talk about this and really get into the heart of it. Should we start by just talking about what we mean when we say play?
Yes.
I think, yeah. I think that there is, there's a lot, and we'll go into some depth about that. But I do want to say that there's not one clear definition of play. It's notoriously hard to define. But what we do know is that there's characteristics associated with it. And if we're going to have TK teachers and their administrators being instructional leaders, knowing how to support play in a TK classroom, we need to know what to look for, those characteristics. So let me just spend a minute talking about that.
Okay.
So play inherently should be pleasurable. It should elicit joy. You want to see the signs of children deeply engaged in their activities. There should be a sense of active movement. So children physically able to move and engage, but also to be able to talk and have rich interactions with one another. When we think about active engagement, we want to think about minds on and hands on. So children's minds are actively engaged, but their bodies, they learn through their bodies. So play very much is that kind of engagement. Play, a characteristic of play is that it is intrinsically motivated. So there is some way in which the individual child or children have a set of interests that are coming from them, something they observe in the world around them that interests them, a question that they're asking, a material they want to explore. But this motivation comes from them for it to be play. And then a final characteristic I want to bring up is that when something is playful, it is dynamic and it's flexible in the way that we can bring our own motivations, our own interests, our own questions. Rules can be changed. There's room for the unexpected to be explored. So you can see with those characteristics, what I didn't say is that it is something that is defined in advance by somebody else, right? There's a sense that when the play is happening, the player is not only engaged, but is co-constructing the experience.
So, Julia, I want to unpack a little bit about what you just said, because there was a lot of good information in there. So going back to when you described play as active, you described play, I believe you said joyful. Thinking about that concept, for our podcast audience, primarily we're looking at administrators, but also teachers are welcome to listen as well. But thinking about administrators who have TK on their campus, and this is brand new, and so for them walking into a TK classroom, it's going to look so much different than what they might see in a second grade classroom or in a fourth grade classroom. And some of that is what you talked about, the dynamic piece, the noise and the movement. So can you talk a little bit about that piece that TK classrooms do look different than other classrooms on campus?
Yeah. So I would love to start my answer to that question by, let's just talk a little bit about the why, right? Why, I mean, you have this question, why is it so important for TK? And I want to say that it is so important for TK because we are talking about in TK, as in all of public education, we want to support children to learn, and we want to support them to develop in the most optimal ways as we can. And so in TK, we're talking about very young children, the early childhood years. So I want to take just a second to say, what do we know from the research? And this is research in many different disciplines: psychology, education, sociology, anthropology. What do we know? And we've literally learned this over decades about how young children learn. Young children who are the age of TK children, how do they learn? Young children need to feel safe in order to learn. That's something that we can imagine is pretty obvious, but it means that we have to create environments that support children to their nervous systems to feel safe, right? They need to, how do they learn best? They learn best when they are active, because with their bodies, moving, talking, engaging, having those rich interactions with relationships and an environment, again, that helps reinforce that they feel safe. Young children learn best when they have time to act like young scientists, because this is what they're doing from the time that they're born. They're observing, they're noticing things, they're wanting to touch and explore and experiment and almost test hypotheses like scientists do. They need time to do that. So they learn best when we give them time in, I call it time abundance, versus you might have heard, people talking about these little increments of time that are very stressful for children. A lot of curriculum in some public schools, especially in kindergartens, we're talking about this, have turned into this time confetti where we ask children to switch activities every 15 minutes. That's not conducive to their learning. So we want time for the children to explore. We need things in children's environments to be meaningful and connected to the things that matter to them and that are familiar to them. Curriculum that brings in the things in children's lives that they care about, the insects that they notice and they have questions about, the dinosaurs they talk endlessly about, but things that are familiar and meaningful to them, their families, their communities. And then I want to say one more thing, and that is that the children learn when they're young, TK age, in an integrated way. And that means that as they're exploring the world, as they're interacting with others, working with objects, playing on playgrounds, and so on, they're building skills and knowledge across many different domains, all at the same time: social, emotional, intellectual, cognitive, physical. That's happening in the context of their play, and they're not needing to, and it's not even helpful to teach them things in domain specific ways. So you don't walk into a high quality early childhood classroom and see children learning social studies for a half an hour and then math for a half an hour, and they're learning in the context of rich play and gaining skills across those domains. So when we think about all of those ideas of how children play, they need to be safe, they need to be actively engaged, we need time for the process of play, and play needs to be integrated and meaningfully connected to their lives. Play is the way that children do that best. And that is why play is so important for TK classrooms, because it is the way that children will learn the most efficiently, the most effectively, and sustain what they're learning and go deep in their learning. We don't want just surface level memorization. We want children to really develop understanding of concepts.
Okay, so to go back to what you said when you first started, you were we're trying to define play, and you said, well, play is hard to define, but you have characteristics, right? So one of the
Mhm.
things that we think about that's hard with play is what people define play in their own way. So they have their own definition
Mhm.
of play. So when you say play to maybe an
Mhm.
administrator or to those
Mhm.
outside early childhood education, it may seem like, well, play means free time. Play is something that you do when you're not busy with your academics. Play is not really learning. Play is a free time activity, but that's not the
Mhm.
case in early childhood. So it's one of those myths about play that play is
Mhm.
not learning. So can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about um, a little more in depth about how play is learning?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. We do have myths about play and about play-based learning that we've heard. They are around us in society. Maybe some of us grew up with and have some of those ideas, and that's where we are. What we want to learn is bring in child development research and early education best practices to unlearn some of those myths and relearn, right? Where how children learn best, what is the best environment for them to learn, and so, what we do know, like I said, from the decades of research, is that children learn with all those ways that I talked about, and play is the best way to do that. Now, to get to what you were saying in the beginning, though, I like to think about it like an iceberg. That oftentimes people, when we think about what we see above the surface of the water with an iceberg, um, if we think about that as what a lot of people associate with play, which is fun, and kids are just having fun and they're engaging, but it's very different than learning. What we understand and learn about when you learn child development, you learn about the research, you learn about early childhood best practices, is we have to look under the water. And that's where we see all of the ways in which play is supporting creativity, cognitive development, imagination, self regulation. And play is actually also the best way for children to learn how to reduce their stress when they're dysregulated to become regulated. And if they are impacted by adverse experience or trauma, to learn how to cope, build resilience, and heal. So, play helps children in so many ways to develop optimally. But I'm wondering, would it be helpful for me to talk about the play based continuum a little bit when we think about child self directed play all the way across the continuum to adult planned and directed? Would that be
Yeah,
helpful?
I do want to go back a little bit because I love the iceberg analogy, because I think what that brought to my mind when you were talking about the iceberg is that underneath there is intentionality to the
Oh,
play that the children have in the classroom. So thinking about, there is time where materials are there and the children can just freely explore and
mhm,
interact with them however they want, which is so
mhm,
important in the classroom. There is
mhm,
also the component that the teachers are planning and have intention behind the activities centered around play and the concepts that they're trying to
mhm,
teach through play. And so I
mhm,
think that that gets missed sometimes, is that there is intention. It's not just a free for all in the classroom. There is intention behind what's happening
yes,
in that classroom and in the
absolutely.
play based learning.
Absolutely. If you are if when you are planning an early childhood learning environment to support children, the work is complex, it's dynamic, it is incredibly intentional and thoughtful. You are bringing so much
Mm.
knowledge of child development and how to set up an engaging environment to support children to learn optimally. Um, Let me try to make some of that visible a little bit to your point. So when we talk about play, we have to think about play-based learning, the pedagogical component or complement to the concept of play. Play-based learning is using play to support children's learning across all domains across the school day. And what we know about play-based learning, and we've been doing a lot of research on it, is that children learn best when they are supported to have different kinds of play throughout the day. And so an early childhood teacher is setting up their classroom to support children in these different kinds of play. So on one end of the continuum, we call it child-led play or self-determined play. And this is play where children are in charge of making the choices of the materials that they're going to play with. They're in charge of the learning goal. They're in charge of deciding how to use the materials, what game, setting up the rules to the game they want to play, whether they're in blocks or they're outside playing on play structures or they are painting pictures. They are driving it from their own intrinsic ideas and interests. And then in the middle of the continuum, we have something called adult-child collaborative play or guided play. And this is a really important element of learning, I think, for all of us, teachers, administrators, families, to lean in and understand guided play, because the research says that it's the child-directed and the guided together that are the most supportive of children's learning at this age, and that the majority of their day in a TK should be spent in those types of play. So let me say, with guided play, it should start by the teacher observing what the children are interested in, because we want to build from that. We're observing, we're listening. What questions are they asking? What are they interested in? What are they exploring? Maybe some children are building a tower with blocks, and we're observing that they're really interested in figuring out how to build a tall tower and keep it standing up. So they're interested in all sorts of things about science and math. And then we, as the adult, are thinking about, how do I build from the child's interest and extend that? I have an idea of a goal in my mind, and I provide a little scaffolding, a little guidance to stretch that child's learning and help them achieve that next skill. So let me give just quick examples. Maybe we offer a certain material like paper and pencil, or paper and pens and tape, and encourage them to draw a little sign that they add to their block play. Or maybe we add a comment from the outside. We notice that they're building a restaurant, and we say, I wonder if your restaurant needs to have some menus. Or you say that you want to have recipes. Tell us what you're cooking, and we engage them in interaction, introduce new vocabulary, introduce new concepts. We might encourage them to draw a picture of their play and then come and share it in a whole group setting. But we're extending their play to support them to develop certain skills. Child-directed, guided play. At the other end of the continuum is adult planned and directed play. And this is where the adult is planning the activity and the adult is choosing the goal, and the child's role is to follow along. There's a value in that in the classroom, but it should be the smallest part of the TK day.
So as we've been discussing our question, why is play so important in TK, with you, Dr. Julie Nicholson, I think about one of the myths that you shared with me about play that ties to this question and is unique, I think, to TK. It's because TK is kind of stuck in the early childhood world, but it is also now a part of that K-12 system. Mm-hmm. So the myth about play being for very young children, that children who are in elementary school, they don't need play as much. That's for very young children. However, TK students are very young children in a K-12 setting. And so fusing the two worlds has been difficult. So thinking about administrators and teachers who are making that move into understanding play, and how does that work in a classroom, and how do I justify, maybe is the word, what I see happening in the classroom as learning, what does that look like as the teacher is in the room? You said there's teacher-led play, they're in that room, but they're also as a facilitator. What does that world look like, where they're bringing the two together, where they're foot in that early learning area, but also that foot in the K-12 system, and fusing that together in the classroom?
I love that you asked that question, because in many ways, that question is saying, what does it mean for a public school that many public schools have not traditionally had preschool age children in the school site, or if they have, it's been a totally separate program that hasn't necessarily been integrated. So now that we have preschool age children coming in, and going back to that why, We want to set up environments that support them to thrive, that support them to learn to the best of their capabilities, and that are aligned in the ways that their brains are wired to learn, that their bodies are developing, um, that support their bodies to develop optimally. If that's our why, and these children are coming for the first time, we have to ask this question, Amy, of what does it mean for a school, for a classroom, for a teacher, for an administrator to be ready for these children?
Right.
And I think we have to recognize that there is a lot of learning to be done, and the reason for that is systemic. Traditionally, and this isn't just in California, this is across the country, our programs where people learn and have their training to get a multiple subject
Mhm.
credential and administrative credential don't include information on child development, don't include information on early childhood best practices. They will. I'm so excited that we're now leaning into the
Mhm.
P3 specialist credential, and the whole idea there is to bring in the knowledge of child development, developmental science into not just TK, but that it's pushed through the early childhood years up through pre-K to third grade, because those are the early childhood years. We know that children can thrive and learn best with these ideas of play-based learning, the active engagement, all the way through that continuum. And so we're going to see conversations happening, lots of learning, unlearning of old ideas, and new learning with this new evidence-based science foundation of what we know is best for children. We're going to see that snowballing as this credential comes in and more people learn about what's best for young children in the TK years. And we can start sharing these practices together, because it is the school that has to get ready for the children.
Right.
And so that's what that looks like. I think it's complicated. It's going to take time. We all have to lean in together, be open in our hearts and minds to saying, we might have to unlearn some things and relearn things, right?
Right. And that is why our work is grounded in supporting school districts in understanding early learning as a part of
Mhm.
their system, because it traditionally hasn't been there. And as you mentioned, teachers and administrators don't necessarily have that background, and they want to know, they want to learn, they want to do
Yeah,
what's best for the children.
they
But
do.
it's a massive amount of information to learn. So we're trying to
Mhm.
give that to them through support on site, professional development, this podcast, to give them information so that they can learn that. Because you're right, the P3 piece, California is moving in that direction where it will be more developmentally appropriate across preschool through
Mhm.
third grade. So we're not just talking about play in TK, we'll be talking about what play looks like in those other grades, and what does it look like to be developmentally appropriate in grades K through 3, which we use that word all the time. They don't necessarily use that word. So you're right,
Mhm.
that information is critical for them. And I
Mhm.
think what we want to do is be able to bring you back again to talk a little bit more and dive into that piece about the teacher, because we could talk for 2 hours about this, but no one wants to listen for 2 hours straight. So if we give it a
Yeah.
bite-sized piece today about the play, and then maybe another episode talk about what does it look like for a teacher in that classroom, how are they supporting that play, what is their role there, in
Yes.
that play. We will provide the link to a book that you are co-author on called The Powerful Role of Play, that we kind of use
Mhm.
as a Bible for us here in the office as we're sharing it out with district leaders, that all this information can be found in that book, in that
Mhm.
publication. So we will definitely share that link out. But just circling back as we're going to close, to think about,
Mhm.
our question was, why is play so important in TK? And usually I have about 3 bullet points to share, but I feel like today it's just because that's how children learn best, period, right?
Exactly. I love that. It's how children learn best. So, from an equity standpoint,
Mm,
we are setting them up to have the optimal brain development, to have the
yep.
optimal body whole body development, and really importantly, to learn in their earliest years and associate going to school, being in classrooms, that they are learning this is a place where I can be fully engaged, where I can feel safe, where this can be joyful and fun, and I can learn interesting things. And what a better foundation than that?
Absolutely.
And
Play is
that's what we
learning.
want all
Play
of our children.
is learning, right?
Play
And
is learning.
that is our
Yes.
mantra. Play is learning. And we want them
Yes.
to have a joyful experience at school. We want them to really love coming to school. And this, you're right, this is the foundation to start that. But you will come
Yes.
back and talk with us more about the
Oh, I'm
teacher's
such
role
a
in play.
fan.
Okay.
I'm such a fan of all of you. I would love to come back. Thanks
Great.
for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie Nicholson. Thank you for being with us.